It's basically an optimistic outlook with quite a lot of headwinds and a lot of risks. As you say, our GDP forecast is relatively buoyant, so just slightly more than our 2024 estimate for GDP growth. And we're expecting inflation to ease off and therefore interest rates to be able to start coming down. All that's very positive, and most of the sectors that we talk about in the report, we're expecting quite good growth. But in terms of the headwinds, obviously the big headwinds are, well, twofold. One is trade, and we wrote this report before Donald Trump was elected US president, but it was actually our core forecast that he would be elected. And therefore we had taken that into account. We had expected some barriers in terms of trade. And I think it's very clear that that's going to be one of the things that's really going to reshape supply chains in 2025. The other big risk, of course, is climate change. And I've seen projections today that this is going to be, again, the hottest year ever, 1.6 degrees below pre-industrial levels. And therefore, we're getting to that point where climate change is becoming a real impact for businesses, not just in terms of legislation. There's a lot of legislation going through about sustainability, but also just in terms of the actual physical impacts of climate change.
إذن قطاع صناعة السيارات من القطاعات المرشحة للتضرر وبشكل كبير ربما من أي تعريفات جمركية أو توترات تجارية، ولكن في نفس الوقت أنتم تتوقعون تعافي لمبيعات السيارات وخاصة السيارات الكهربائية حتى تتوقعون نمو ب 16%. فلماذا هذا التفاؤل رغم كل التحديات؟
Yes, so the outlook for the sector is actually still relatively bright, and that's primarily because China is half of the EV market, the global EV market, and that market is still going great guns in terms of EV sales. It is true that there's been quite a dramatic slowdown in the US market and in European markets in terms of EVs, but also other developing markets, the growth rates there are still pretty strong in terms of EVs. So altogether, the momentum behind the EV shift is still there, and it's still there primarily because the Chinese government has backed its EV makers so strongly. Now, that doesn't bode well, obviously, for European and most US automakers, and that's one reason why we're seeing trade barriers rise so rapidly in this area, most of them targeted obviously at Chinese EVs, trying to stop them from taking over the market and giving European automakers and US automakers a little bit of breathing space to get their products out onto the market and in order that they can take some of that market share. Now, the danger in the US is that despite the presence of Elon Musk within the US government, there may well be a process of kind of disincentivizing that shift to EVs, or at least the shift to EVs as far as Ford, GM, Stellantis, the other players in the market are concerned. And it may be that they will start to disinvest some, rein back some of their investment into EV development and start focusing more on their kind of pickup trucks. And we've already seen some signs of that. So my longer term worry in the automotive market is that some of these players might actually start to lose competitiveness in an international market where the shift is clearly towards EVs.
وبالنسبة لقطاع التكنولوجيا تتوقعون تراجع إنفاق الشركات على الذكاء الاصطناعي، لماذا؟ وإلى أي مدى أيضا تتوقعون تغير في الجو الرقابي بالنسبة لشركات التكنولوجيا عالميا وفي الولايات المتحدة تحت إدارة ترامب الجديدة؟
It's not really a decrease, it's just that the kind of bubble aspect of that is starting to disappear in the AI sector. So there'll no longer be quite such indiscriminate investment in the AI sector. What's happening now is that you're starting to get the market coalescing around some of the bigger players, obviously with smaller offshoots in kind of niche areas. And from a corporate level, what you're seeing is companies moving from that phase of experimentation to trying to actually use AI within certain types of roles. Now, one of the things that we're talking about is the ways in which that might start to replace jobs or at least reshape jobs. And obviously, the most obvious areas are things like, customer service, call centres, marketing, those kind of consumer-facing interfaces. And therefore, we're expecting some reshaping of those industries as that becomes implemented. Moving on to your second point about Trump and his kind of deregulation of the tech sector, we're most likely to see that in terms of the antitrust measures that have been really strenuously pushed in the US, but also in the EU, So we're most likely to see that in terms of the antitrust moves that we've seen strenuously enforced in the EU, but also in the US. And we're expecting to see less of that kind of oversight of the tech sector under a Trump administration, of the tech sector and lots of other sectors as well. I mean, the antitrust enforcement is not going to be as strong, we expect. There's also going to be less pressure on tech sectors over the content and their monitoring of content. And that obviously points to the presence of Elon Musk within the government as well.
قطاع التكنولوجيا أيضا قد يتأثر من أي توترات تجارية، فإلى أي مدى من الممكن أن تؤثر تعريفات جمركية أو تصعيد على صعيد الملف الاقتصادي التجاري بين الولايات المتحدة والصين على شركات التكنولوجيا؟
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to envisage this as a world where basically you've got the tech giants in China on one side and the tech giants in the US on the other side. And effectively, the rest of the world is having to make a choice between those two tech systems. And so, definitely we would expect the trade barriers to impinge on that. They already do, obviously, in terms of the semiconductor industry and the US restrictions that it's put on China in terms of how advanced the semiconductors it's producing can be and its access to that kind of technology. So definitely the tech divide is mirroring the trade divide in general across the world.